So I've got the inside completely epoxied, and now that I have the inside epoxied, I flip it over and was like, oh my god, I have all these crazy gaps in between the plywood and the gunnel. Okay, well, if I was doing it professionally, or if I've done this before, I would have known to put epoxy on the gunnel. That way, when I applied the plywood, it would just squeeze it out and fill any gaps that I might have had. But I didn't do it that way. So if I were to build this boat again, which I probably will because this was a pretty fun project, I would know to pre-drill all the holes exactly so it lines up, take it off, put a healthy bead of epoxy and filler and bonding material to it, and then squish together. That way it squeezes out all the it squeezes it out and fills it. So now I've got to deal with having to smooth out all these voids and gaps to make sure that it really stays nice and waterproof, because there's only so much a coat of epoxy and fiberglass can do if you don't do all the extra work. So they have carbide scrapers that you can use, and it'll squeeze off the epoxy once it can no longer, you can't really leave a fingerprint in it. All the videos say not to apply more epoxy because it just won't get that chemical fusion, and I want that chemical fusion, but I don't get that anymore. So now I got to wait for it to dry all the way and then sand it. That way it adheres to it mechanically, and then the wood I will put a wet layup. So I'll put a coat of epoxy onto the ply, let it soak some in, and then I can put the fiberglass over it, and the fiberglass is just more of a adhesion protection than actual strength. When I do this again, if I do this again, I'm going to use a 5mm ply. I'll actually spring for some 5mm marine grade sheathing. That way it's easier to bend and keeps this boat lightweight. I've got all the gaps filled in. They're nice and dry. And now I'm just going to take a cold chisel that I sharpened really well, and then just scrape off all of the extra epoxy, because I could wait for it to cure and then take a sand or flap disc and get it all smooth, or I can just start scraping now. Either way, it's not a race anymore, because epoxy takes time to dry, and it's cold in my garage even though I have the fast cure epoxy. So I've got plenty of time to start scraping. And there's my doggo just hiding in the shadow next to the heater. I have done the epoxying for the first time ever. Hooray! I did a wet layup. It's when you put down a layer of epoxy first, and then you put down the fiberglass on top. Before you do all that, cut the length of fiberglass that you'll need for it, and then you roll it up. That way it's easier to apply. I haven't done this before, so it doesn't look very good. This little extra part right here, I just slapped on some more. If when you buy your fiberglass, if you only want to do one sheet as a protector, abrasion protection / waterproofing stuff, get the 60-inch wide. Additionally, if you're gonna decide to spend the good money on the West Marine epoxy, spend the good money and get some good fiberglass. This fiberglass did not want to wet out. It's when it turns that clear stuff. I fought for it the entire time. Also, a lesson learned: if you buy the extra, the fast hardener, because you're currently in a state that's pretty cold, and you're like, oh, wow, I'm working in my garage, I need it to cure fast because it's 50 something degrees outside. Maybe don't turn your space heater on to full blast and have your entire garage at 70 degrees, and then wonder why you only have like 5 minutes to do any work. Who would have thunk? So tomorrow I'm going to be working super cold so that I can get some really long working time. Oh no, there's a bubble there. Is that a bubble? It was a bubble. It's still a bubble. Since this is not for strength, I'm not too worried about all those air bubbles. I know that It's already epoxied, and then I'm still going to be putting on a good bottom paint to, you know, keep it waterproof, and it's not staying in the water, so I don't have to worry about it being too waterproof. And during this off seasons, it'll be under shade. That way it doesn't need to be 100%, but 100% would be nice. So lessons learned. Make sure that you buy 60-inch wide fiberglass. That way you could do it in one go and just be done with it. And then make sure you get the right type of epoxy speed for the temperature that you're working in. So in my case, tomorrow when I do this, I will not have the heater on. And then at night, when I'm ready for it to cure, or when I get closer to the night, when I'm going to give it several hours to cure, I'll crank the heat up in here. That way it's super hot in here. That way it dries and cures at 70 degrees, because that's what it gets my garage to. It can cure at that speed or at that temperature. But other than that, it looks great. I don't have a tripod or a stand to hold the camera up. That's why I'm not recording any of the work as I go. But I'm enjoying it. Let me know if you got any questions so far. Here's what 2 layers of 7-ounce fiberglass and a poorly applied epoxy look like. There's definitely some dry spots. There's definitely some bubbles. It's definitely super uneven, but in the end, this is just for abrasion resistance. It's pretty much I know it's waterproof because I did the wet layup first, and I made sure that the first layer of epoxy resin soaked into the plywood. Also, since this is 1/4-inch plywood and not 5mm sheathing, I'm not too worried about its structural strength of the fiberglass, like truly adhering. Since this is just one big old piece of fiberglass, I know it's not, as long as I don't get the front end ripped off and then it just rips the whole thing off, I know it'll stick to it pretty damn well. So now I'm gonna flip it over, and now that it's flipped over, I can start painting the inside. I'll start painting the inside, all the surfaces. So it'll be some type of paint. I don't know, acrylic, whatever's some cheap. I'm already over budget because I went with, marine epoxy or actual epoxy resin versus like polyester resin. Not too concerned about that. I wanted this to be cheap and quick, and it's not coming out quick or cheap. Not worried about that. I actually spent more money on the epoxy than I did the wood materials so far. But yay. That's where I'm at. If you have any questions, just go ahead and type them up in the comments. Trying to find a paint that will somewhat stick to epoxy is pretty hard, especially if you just want it in a dull green color as a base kind of thing, like that. And I ended up using acrylic, exterior acrylic, which is pretty pricey. Probably not as pricey as epoxy, or it might have been the same, but I sanded the epoxy down with 80 grit, and on this piece, on these 2 sections right here, I sanded a little bit, cleaned it off with alcohol, came over here, just cleaned it off with alcohol. This scratch is somewhat easy, especially on parts where, it's not sanded, it just scrapes off. Over here, on the other hand, it only scrapes off on the parts that I didn't, properly sand. So I went all through there, and then I'm not going to care about here. I'm just going to slap it on thick, let it dry, let it, cure out. I'll put a second coat on here just so it's all even, because this is going to get sealed up out of the way for now. And then in here is the work area, so I made sure that was all good to go. And then here I'm just going to slap paint, and then after I do that is when I'll install the top layer, and then I'll flip it over. No, install the top layer, epoxy it. I'll put I'm not gonna use epoxy because I don't have a lot left. I've got like half a gallon left, but I'm gonna take some 100% silicone, put a fat bead all the way around it. You know, screw it down, make sure I've got good silicone coming out the sides, and then I'll epoxy over it and let it overhang a little bit, and then that, you know, let it soak in the rest of the way, make sure it gets a good seal. Or I'll just bite the bullet and whip some peanut butter up with the epoxy and the filler, close up all the gaps. I've got the outboard on here. If you search your, you know, local marketplace, Facebook, obviously, you can end up finding some great deals like that. I just got to do a carb cleanup and it'll be ready to go. Hooray! It is looking great so far. I've got about 3 coats of 100% acrylic exterior paint all on the inside, and I was gonna keep going. I was gonna leave the forward chamber and this rear chamber sealed up, and then I said, well, thought, man, it'd be stupid to leave that sealed up if I'm not 100% sure. Also, I've got to run navigation lights on this since it's got to get registered as a boat, since the areas I normally hunt in count as federal waters, which require a boat be titled and registered and all that good stuff. Which means if it's got a motor, which is sitting on that thrown together stand over there, and it runs great, it means that I need to have my navigation lights. Some are here and over there. I've got a light bar I'm going to slap right here. I'm right here-ish. And then I'm going to have the navigation lights right in front of it. And then I've got my the solid little bumper part. And then I got the light coming in that I'll slap right here in this back corner. That should be tall enough to clear the rudder, the outboard over there. That way I can sit here and operate the boat, and it'll be great. All I have to do next is I've painted the inside, underneath here. I've painted like 3 or 4 coats to seal it, and now I'm gonna make some putty with the epoxy, the 2-part epoxy and the filler. Make a nice thick peanut butter and fill in all these joints. Slap a nice healthy glob of it all the way around. That way, when I screw these together, I've already pre-drilled, pre-screwed it to make sure it fits the way I need it to. It just oozes out from the inside out, and that just ensures, and then I can just, you know, rub all the extra epoxy that oozes out and make sure, you know, it fares it nice and good. And then I can slap it, and then once that's done, I can start epoxy wet layup. So, you know, slap some epoxy down, let it soak into the wood, do all of that, let it soak into the wood, and then throw some fiberglass for some abrasion resistance. Let that cure for a day or so, and then I'll paint it that color, which it is such an ugly green, but it'll hide a body, I think. After I have these fiberglassed in, I'll cut straight down. I've got a neck. Oh, you can't see that there, that line. I'll go straight from that corner straight up. Same on that side, same on this side. Pull this out, and then I have to put a little rest on this, a little rest bar furring strip on here, on that side. That way I can run some strips all the way back and front, and then I'll have a spot to lay, sit down on. That's not these ribs. So far I can still lift the whole boat with one person. Obviously that's not with the motor involved because that's just extra weight. But it's looking great so far, and it'd be exciting.